Thanks, guys. I'm here with Dr. Diane Wiener. Dr. Wiener,
Hi,
thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure. Hi, Connor.
So the second of the Theta Tau videos that was released shows highly offensive content revolving around someone miming someone with a disability.
Mm-hmm.
Does the content of that video, do you believe that that's reflective of the way that disability is viewed on SU's campus?
I think there are a few ways to answer that, and the one that I'll choose is the most authentic of the many that some people would like me to articulate, to be candid. And I think there are some people who have a way of talking about disability, even though they're part of social justice movements, and they certainly mean well. And I'm not the arbiter of diversity, and I'm not the arbiter of inclusion narratives or definitions, but I know a lot of people who are part of social justice movements ourselves. Some of those individuals are not familiar with the notion of ableism, need to be thinking about how they plan events and gatherings and acts of civil disobedience and enactments of the First Amendment, enactments of free speech, freedom of the press, mindful of the array of ways that people experience the world with disabilities. So I think some people really are awesomely committed to identity politics or axes of difference, intersectionality, the many different ways that people think over time for decades about these different understandings of how different identities interconnect with each other and are interlaced with each other. And some of those individuals really just don't, it's not meant to be, you know, like, you don't get it, like, you're not woke, like, if I'm allowed to even use that word in my context, but I think so, if I may. And I think that they don't, it doesn't occur to them. And if it does occur, it's the very last thing that's discussed. And this is something I mentioned in the remarks that I made, that the chancellor was gracious enough to engage me in wanting to share himself those ideas with the community of Syracuse University and all of our alumni. So second, if I may, is that okay?
Of course.
I think there are some people who are actively, willfully, and very strategically hostile toward disabled people. And some people use identity first language, disabled people. Some people say people with disabilities. I think there are some people who actually do believe in 2018 on our campus and elsewhere, certainly around the country and in various contexts that we are familiar with, which I won't comment on in detail in this context. People here who think that disabled people's lives are not worth living, think that we should be cured, think that we should be fixed, that we don't deserve to live. And that's not an uncommon point of view or perspective, because we don't want to emphasize only vision, right? I think another aspect here is people who have some idea of the meaning of disability, but think of it really as an overcoming narrative. This has been discussed by many people, colleagues of mine in the Disability Studies program, many other faculty who were part of a number of different arenas on campus, who are very engaged in social justice work, broadly construed. But there's not a lot of discussion about what disability justice is, and how disability justice is always already about people of color, queer people, people from other marginalized identities, people with gender nonconformity, you know, don't believe in the gender binary, don't adopt a gender binary understanding, meaning that they think, as I do frankly, that there are more than two genders. People who are from multiple backgrounds that are subject to xenophobia, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism. Specifically, we don't talk enough on this campus about transphobia. And so all of those experiences of oppression and the ways that they connect to misogyny and imperialism and capitalism, and yes, I'm using those words, and I'm cool with that, how those are already about ableism and how ableism is interconnected with them. They depend on one another. So there are some people who have really great wisdom but don't necessarily think about ableism when talking about all of that. So I know that was a long answer. I'm not always known for being terse. We've met before. I'm going to fist bump you on camera.
All right. Okay?
You know I'm a fan of yours, and I mean that in a positive way, not based on the word fanatic, which is its technical etymology, you know. But I think it's really important that we think it's not like this is not representative, but it's not like it is. It depends, and I know that's not the best answer in a journalistic context, but we have a real spectrum of people here in terms of understandings and degrees of ignorance and outright violence.
So you said that you're concerned that sometimes the subject of ableism isn't properly addressed in fields of identity politics or social justice. There have been a lot of discussions and student forums throughout campus in the wake of details emerging about these Theta Tau videos and the Theta Tau investigation.
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel that these dialogues have addressed the subject of ableism?
I think that the beginnings of some of these dialogues have, what some people might call interconnected understandings of marginalization, disenfranchisement, and privilege. And sometimes they coexist, of course. It might be that if I were to think of some people I know and myself and you, that we in some contexts have a great deal of benefit and social capital and understanding of our position as having a little more power or a lot more power than another person might in some cases. And in the same breath or at the same moment in another context later in the day, there might be an experience of marginalization. So it's not just you're either marginalized or you're oppressed. And many of my colleagues on the faculty and staff, and certainly among the student body who deserve much more credit than they often receive for the leadership and knowledge and wisdom that they share. Some people certainly understand all of that. But I think that what happens is the conversation goes on and then the definition of diversity is flattened or not as nuanced, and then we have to remind people with respect, we're here. Some of us are disabled and folks of color. Some of us are disabled, folks of color and queer. Some of us are from multiple countries around the world and are not domestic students. Some of us have family members here and there and grew up with the understanding that people who are disabled are better off in an institution. Some people here still think that. So it's like a gentle, but not really. It's a combination of gentle and assertive, and it's not like, don't forget about us. It's more complicated than that. And I've heard that at every single one of these forums. One of the forums, it's technically a public event, but I won't identify someone I know very well, who's a very strong person, a deeply ethical person, a student leader, who happens to be someone who's a person of color and disabled, was very dismayed by the ways that some of the student leaders were interacting around the theme of disability, I'll say. And that individual, I won't even use a gender pronoun, I think I have not yet, came to the front and said, this isn't just about the administration, it's about how we treat each other, and it's about how this event was planned. And one of the people who had made a decision that might have affected that person's perception, I'm being very careful and gracious, I hope, that's my intention, apologized in front of everyone assembled and said they did not mean to have done this thing that in fact understandably affected that student and probably all the other disabled people in the room in the ways that it did.
So with some of the successes of that dialogue that I think you touched on, the next step that I think a lot of people are looking for in various different realms is concrete action from the university. What sort of specific steps are you looking for from SU going forward?
So a couple of things. I know somebody said to me, a dear friend and colleague said to me earlier, I think people are forumed out, like too many forums. If forum can be a verb, and now it's a transitive verb, forumed out, right? And it'll be on Google, you can look it up. It'll be in the Oxford English Dictionary next year maybe, but I won't digress too much. I do want to host a forum. Probably next week. We have to work out details, make sure that obviously it's accessible, and I mean that broadly in terms of language and space and sign language interpreting and live captioning, and obviously if there's anything having to do with lighting that is, for interpreters and for the audience, etc. Not just one way, but multiple ways. And the language that we use is often not as much of the conversation, and I take responsibility for that in the case of this document that I wrote that was shared, because it's very academic-y, but it also felt like here we are in higher education, and this is a place of knowledge. And of course, what is our university seal say? It talks about knowledge crowns those who seek her, gendered female, I believe, although it depends on who that person was who wrote that and what they intended, and we can go off on that another time. So I want to have a forum that's accessible in a broad array of ways, because then structurally it's sending a message, and all the other forums have been accessible in multiple ways. I'm not saying they haven't been. So in order to figure out the date, that has to happen. And at that, what we'll do is first, people who self-identify as disabled, including myself, will gather together, student leaders, members of student organizations, students of all particular orientations in the university who might not necessarily be formally affiliated with anything and just want to be present. And faculty and staff, community members will be welcome if anyone from the alumni world wants to come, hooray. Some of those, of course, are individuals or community members too. It depends where they live and how far. And I think community is not just local. All those individuals will be welcome, and we're going to just be with each other. And allies can come. But as I've said, allyship is not a coupon. So if someone self-identifies as an ally, I'm not going to ask for some certificate. Here's my ally certificate. But the person who identifies as an ally, or the people who identify as allies, have to really check themselves and feel confident. Do I really think that's a cool thing that I'm doing that? So if people really check themselves and ask themselves, and if they're sighted, look in the mirror, and if they're not sighted, find some other way to access how they understand when they have integrity, how they communicate with themselves, then they can come. And we're going to do that, and we're going to talk about how we feel in private, without any cameras, and without any live streaming, and without any captioning, except internal captioning that will exist, but not like public captioning. So it'll be communication access real-time translation, but not outwardly facing. So I don't want to be misquoted, and I know you would never do that. There will be captioning, but not for the public. And there'll be sign language interpreting, of course. And then we'll meet with everyone who wants to be with us. And we're going to talk in an exploratory way about how ableism is often not understood or discussed, and how it is reliant on and informs and is interconnected with all of these other experiences of social violence. The next thing I would like is to make recommendations with colleagues of mine to make sure that we have appropriate and vivid representation of students from an array of disability identities from multiple aspects of the campus life here to serve on the Disability Services Audit Steering Committee, to be co-chaired by Dean Joanna Massangila and Dr. Michael Schwartz, of which I'm a member. Many students have pointed out that there are 3 students. I went on record in public at the forum earlier this week and said, I will personally speak to the provost and Senior Vice President Dolan Ivanovich and Vice President Pete Sala, and tell them that we need to address this, and I feel confident that they'll agree. We need more students than 3. And we certainly need a graduate student. There were 2 undergraduates and 1 law student. One of the students at that forum indicated, and again, it's public, but I'll still be not identifying anyone without their permission. I'm the only, I mean, of course now you'll know anyway because the list is there and people might know who it is, but the person pointed out with clarity, and pointed is maybe not the best way to put it because of her embodiment, and I think she'd be okay with me saying this on camera, and I will use a gender pronoun, I think she wouldn't mind. She gestured and said, you know, why am I the only student of color? Why? There are other disabled students of color. So there are 3 students, 2 of whom are undergraduates, 1's a law student, technically not a graduate student, but yes, professional student, and 1 student of color of the, so 3. So that's the second thing. The third thing is I have every confidence in Mr. Barry L. Wells, my co-chair of the Council on Diversity and Inclusion, and I have every confidence in our chancellor that we are not going to just do better, because as people have said, that's not enough, that we will. It's not that we can and we must, we will. And there are reasons why the students are expressing the Recognize Us movement. And I won't bore you with my, history as an activist And I think even though I work within a system that's highly complex, I wouldn't work here if I didn't believe in the possibility of change. So those are 3 things that I would add.
All right, Dr. Wiener, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.